You have enemies? Good. It means you've stood up for something sometime in your life. An amazing quote by an amazing leader of one of the very few total wars, Winston Churchill. So, based on Robinson's definition of total war requires mobilization, the blurring of roles between soldier and citizen, complete destruction of the enemy, as well as total control of society. Complete destruction of the enemy, in Robinson's definition, is to destroy anything that could be of any use to the enemy during or after the war. Now, total control of society not only refers to propaganda and, convincing your country that it is a good and morally just thing that you're in this war, but also a total wartime economy. In other words, all goods that are produced by your country are for the sake of the war. So, modern warfare has some similarities, by definition, to the total wars that have been fought, but not enough to be considered total wars, due to lacking one or two of the before mentioned traits of total war. However, I do believe that we should go back to fighting total wars, because total wars took less time than your average modern war, and total wars actually got their goals done better and more often than in modern warfare. Not to mention that modern wars even have a higher civilian to soldier ratio than, total wars, despite not having as many deaths. To get started, let's look at the length of wars. Most modern wars took a lot longer to complete than your average total war. There are 8 wars in total, all time, that took less time to complete than your big name total wars. In other words, we're talking here your World War I, your World War II, and your American Civil War. And when I talk modern wars, I'm referring to anything after World War II. 6 of these wars were modern wars. However, there are just very close to 100 wars that took twice as long as World War II, the longest of the aforementioned total wars. List of conflicts by duration. 1. Quote, 1. Wars are lasting much longer than they used to 20 years ago. End quote. Global trends of war and their humanitarian impacts. In other words, recent wars, or modern wars, take much, much longer on average than your older wars. But being fast isn't the only thing that the total wars have going for them. They are also more successful than your total war, or than your modern wars, sorry. In total wars, the goals of the quote-unquote good guys, coming from an American's perspective on, mostly the wars that the United States are involved in, because we're involved in everything, it seems like sometimes, are always achieved. So the total war goals of the good guys were always achieved, which isn't very true for your non-total wars post World War II. And, well, let's look at some examples. In World War II, saw the fall of the Third Reich and the Nazi Germans, along with the creation of one of the most powerful entities that is not a individual country in modern warfare, the United Nations. But in wars since World War II, the United States have only managed to achieve the following in all wars, in combination, that the United States was a part of since World War II. They have managed to stop North Korea from invading South Korea and have shut down a couple of small dictatorships. Torren and Miller, page 5. However, they were not successful in shutting down a couple other small dictatorships, and with a special note to the Taliban, which managed to win the 20-year war in Afghanistan last year. And, well, they're kind of a dictatorship and not good, but yet the U.S. just withdrew. Based on my research, World War II accomplished more than the combination of all wars after it that the United States was involved in. And yes, this does exclude some wars, but this is a U.S. history class, so we're mostly focused on the achievements and the success of the United States. Quote, "The formula, in effect, counts all military-age males in a strike zone as combatants." Woods. Or end quote, Woods. This quote refers to during Obama's time in presidency, they had to redefine the term civilian for death counts as to make themselves look better at the home front and to still have support for what they were doing, despite the fact they were killing more civilians than they were really reporting, because they put down people who weren't actually fighting as combatants. We can't ignore the amount of death a total war causes, though. The total wars are some of the most costly wars. And that is a true fact that World War II does have the highest death count in a war ever. However, if you look past that into my point here, the actual civilian to soldier ratios of modern wars compared to our total wars, the total wars, so we'll use World War II as an example because it has the highest of the three total wars, and it had a civilian to soldier ratio at 2-1, or 67% of all deaths during World War II were civilian. And this number also applies to the Korean War that happened right afterwards. Civilian casualty ratio. But I also found that the Iraq War had a 77% ratio, or a 77 percentage of all deaths being civilian during the Iraqi War. It's like, that's interesting because, well, during World War II, you had plenty of major events that were just targeted at civilians. To name a few, you've got the Holocaust and the atomic bombs that we dropped on Japan that almost exclusively killed civilians. But yet Iraq had a higher civilian to soldier casualty ratio? Interesting. I believe that these higher civilian to soldier casualty ratios are caused by the increase in the amount of people living in urban areas. And, well, this is because more people move to urban areas because that's where work is, but then more bombings are targeted at urban areas, and the more densely populated they are, the more deaths. Quote, wars are more often fought in highly populated urban areas, and when high-powered explosive weapons are used, large numbers of civilians are at a higher risk of death. End quote. Global trends of war and their humanitarian impacts. In other words, a higher percentage of war deaths are civilians due to people wanting to be in more urban areas, but then more bombs are used and more readily available via things like drones that then cause them to have more civilian deaths because they're trying to target maybe the leaders that live in those urban areas. Or maybe not, who knows. The fighting of total wars is a good thing that we should go back to because they are, one, faster than modern wars. They get things done. And well, they have a lower civilian to soldier death ratio, which, I mean, seems slightly counteractive to me, but what do I know? But there are over 100 modern wars, but only 6 of these take less time than the 3 total wars. Interesting. In some modern wars, they would have to change the definition of civilian to make themselves look more successful on the home front, without actually being more successful. Most people live in an urban area, which means that a higher percentage of war deaths are civilians due to the increase in availability and easality of using bombs. Quote, the whole history of the world is summed up in the fact that when nations are strong, they are not always just. And when they wish to be just, they are not always strong. End quote. This is another amazing quote by an amazing leader during one of the few total wars, Winston Churchill. Thank you.